Dawn. The Pearl River holds its breath. Somewhere in the fog, a man gives an order that will break an empire. Commissioner Lin has just ordered 20,000 chests of foreign opium seized and destroyed, the largest contraband confiscation in human history, a declaration that will trigger war between the world's oldest civilization and its newest empire. The Daoguang Emperor believes he is saving his people from poison. He does not yet know he has just signed away 3,000 years of Chinese supremacy. By the time the smoke clears, China will be carved into spheres of foreign influence. The Middle Kingdom will become the sick man of Asia, and it all begins with a plant. How did opium, a substance that had existed in China for centuries, suddenly become the weapon that shattered the Qing Dynasty? Why did Britain, the champion of free trade and civilization, wage war to force drugs onto an unwilling nation? And what does this century of humiliation reveal about power, addiction, and the true cost of empire? This is the story of how commerce became conquest, of silver flowing out and poison flowing in, of emperors who believed in heaven's mandate meeting merchants who believed only in profit. It is the story of two worlds colliding, and only one surviving intact. To understand the catastrophe, you must first understand what was lost. China in 1800 is not a struggling nation awaiting rescue by Western progress. It is the richest, most populous, most sophisticated civilization on Earth. 350 million people. 1/3 of humanity lives under Qing rule. From the frozen forests of Manchuria to the tropical shores of Hainan, from the Tibetan Plateau to the Yellow Sea, the empire stretches across territory that makes European kingdoms look like minor estates. The Grand Canal alone carries 4 million tons of grain annually, more cargo than moves through any waterway in Europe. Chinese agricultural technology, terraced paddies, sophisticated irrigation, crop rotation, night soil fertilization, feeds more people per acre than anywhere else on the planet. The empire does not merely survive, it flourishes. Chinese porcelain is the most sought-after luxury good in the world. European aristocrats bankrupted themselves collecting it. Chinese silk dresses, every noble from Madrid to Moscow. Chinese tea has become the British national beverage, consumed in quantities that drain the treasury. And Chinese manufacturing, from iron production to textile weaving, operates at scales that won't be matched in the West for another 50 years. The empire produces approximately 70 million taels of silver worth of exports annually. That is 105 million ounces. $6 billion in modern value flowing into Chinese coffers year after year. Britain buys tea, Europe buys silk and porcelain, and China wants almost nothing in return. This is the problem that will unravel everything. The trade imbalance. The West has developed an insatiable appetite for Chinese goods, but China has no corresponding hunger for Western products. British wool? Too coarse for refined tastes. European manufactured goods? Chinese workshops produce better quality at lower cost. Western weapons? The empire considers itself militarily supreme. So the silver flows out. British merchants watch their national treasure hemorrhage to China and search desperately for something, anything. The Chinese will buy in sufficient quantity to balance the scales. Cotton fails. Western manufacturers fail. Even British attempts to copy Chinese porcelain and silk fail. But there is one crop that changes everything. A flower cultivated in British-controlled Bengal. Papaver somniferum, the opium poppy. Opium is not new to China. Chinese physicians have used it for centuries, sparingly, medicinally, for pain relief and severe dysentery. But recreational use is rare, limited, socially stigmatized. The empire imports perhaps 200 chests annually. Tiny amounts, controllable. The British East India Company looks at opium and sees opportunity. In Bengal, they control vast territories where the climate is perfect for poppy cultivation. They can produce opium in industrial quantities, and unlike wool or manufactured goods, opium has one quality that makes it the perfect export. It is addictive. You cannot force someone to keep buying wool, but if you can create enough customers for opium, they will purchase it regardless of price, regardless of consequence. Addiction transforms luxury into necessity. The company develops the system with industrial precision. Bengal farmers are required to grow opium instead of food crops. The raw latex is processed into bowls, each weighing approximately 140 pounds, wrapped in poppy petals, packed into chests, transported to Calcutta. Auctions are held. The opium is sold to private merchants who will smuggle it into China. This legal fiction is essential. The British government officially disapproves of the opium trade. The East India Company cannot be seen directly selling drugs to China, so they auction it to independent merchants, British, American, Parsi, who assume the risk of smuggling. Everyone profits. Everyone denies responsibility. By 1820, British India exports 4,000 chests annually to China. That is 560,000 pounds of opium, enough to supply approximately 200,000 regular users. Within 15 years, that number will triple. The system operates like this. Western ships anchor beyond Chinese territorial waters, technically legal, impossible to stop. These receiving ships become floating warehouses. Chinese smugglers arrive in fast boats, called scrambling dragons and river crabs. They pay silver. They collect opium. They vanish into the network of rivers and canals that penetrate the empire like veins. Chinese authorities watch helplessly. The coast is too long to patrol effectively. The smuggling networks are too sophisticated, too well-financed, too deeply connected to corrupt officials who take their cut. When the Navy does intercept shipments, they find themselves outgunned by Western vessels with modern cannons. The opium flows inland, first to coastal cities, then up rivers, along canals, into the interior. It reaches Beijing. It reaches remote villages. It spreads through every level of Chinese society, from imperial officials to dock workers, from wealthy merchants to peasant farmers. The addict's day revolves around a single question: where will the next pipe come from? Opium costs roughly half a day's wages for a laborer. But addiction doesn't calculate cost. It demands satisfaction. So, the worker begins spending full day's wages, then 2 days, then a week's earnings in a single night. Families disintegrate. A man sells his tools, his furniture, his wife's jewelry, his children's clothes. When possessions run out, he sells his labor in advance, borrowing against future wages that will never come. sinking into debt bondage that has no escape. The final degradation. Families sell daughters into servitude to feed the father's craving. In 1836, a Chinese official reports, the disease has penetrated all classes. Scholars abandon their books, soldiers abandon their fields, even Buddhist monks abandon their vows. He estimates between 2 and 10 million regular opium users throughout the empire. Others place the number higher, much higher. The social collapse triggers economic catastrophe. Opium must be purchased with silver. Chinese copper cash, the currency ordinary people use, is worthless to British merchants who demand hard currency. So silver flows out of China at catastrophic rates. 100,000 taels annually in the early years, then 3 million taels, then 6 million. The centuries-old trade surplus reverses completely. As silver drains from the empire, the copper-to-silver exchange rate collapses. Taxes are assessed in silver, but peasants earn copper cash. Suddenly they need twice as much copper to meet tax obligations. Then 3 times, then 4. The government's revenue collapses while the people's tax burden effectively quadruples. Granaries empty, infrastructure crumbles, soldiers go unpaid. The empire that feeds 1/3 of humanity begins to starve itself to feed a drug habit. And still the opium ships arrive. 12,000 chests annually, 16,000, 20,000. Each chest representing countless ruined lives, broken families, abandoned children. The Daoguang Emperor watches his realm disintegrate. He is not a weak man. He inherited an empire at its zenith and has watched it decline for 20 years. He has tried prohibition, failed. Tried stricter enforcement, failed. Tried appeals to British morality, failed. The British argue that prohibition creates the problem. Legalize opium, tax it, control it, the crisis will resolve itself. The emperor rejects legalization. He is a Confucian ruler. His mandate from heaven demands he protect his people's virtue and well-being. Legalizing poison to collect taxes is morally unconscionable. The problem is not prohibition. The problem is foreign merchants flooding China with narcotics for profit. Stop the supply. Save the people. In 1838, he makes his decision. He appoints Commissioner Lin, a man with a reputation for absolute integrity and fearsome determination, to end the opium trade completely. Lin arrives in Canton with imperial authority and a simple mission: cut off the poison at its source. Lin Zexu is no naive bureaucrat. Before arriving in Canton, he studies Western knowledge. He has Chinese scholars translate Western newspapers and books. He learns about British politics, military capabilities, geography. He understands he faces a sophisticated opponent, but he also believes justice stands with China. The British are criminals trafficking poison. International law, even Western law, prohibits such trade. Morality is unambiguous. His strategy is direct. First, he targets Chinese collaborators. Smugglers are arrested, their property seized. Corrupt officials are dismissed or threatened. The network begins to collapse from within. Then he turns to the foreign merchants. Lin surrounds the foreign factory district in Canton with troops. No one enters. No one leaves. He addresses a letter to Queen Victoria herself. I have heard that smoking opium is strictly forbidden in your own country. Why do you allow this destructive substance to be sent to harm other nations? The way of heaven is fairness to all. Suppose foreigners came to Britain selling opium. Would you permit it? The British merchants panic. They are hostages. Lin demands they surrender all opium in their possession and sign bonds promising never to smuggle again. Violation means execution. Chief Superintendent Charles Elliot, the British government's representative, finds himself trapped. He cannot allow British subjects to be threatened with execution. He cannot allow the opium trade to end. Too many British fortunes depend on it. Elliot makes a fateful decision. He orders all British merchants to surrender their opium to him, personally, as representative of Her Majesty's government. Then he surrenders it to Commissioner Lin, not as contraband belonging to merchants, but as British government property being illegally confiscated by China. This legal maneuver transforms a criminal matter into an international incident. The merchants lose opium, but gain compensation claims against their own government. Britain loses face but gains justification for war. 20,350 chests, 1,400 tons of opium, 3 million pounds sterling in value. The entire year's opium export to China confiscated in a single stroke. Commissioner Lin conducts the destruction with ceremony befitting a great victory. He orders deep trenches dug on the beach at Human. Workers mix the opium with lime and salt, pour in seawater. The chemical reaction destroys the narcotic properties. For 23 days, the work continues. 1,400 tons of opium dissolve into the ocean. Lin performs rituals apologizing to the sea god for polluting the waters, but explaining the necessity. From the Chinese perspective, this is righteous enforcement of law. A criminal substance has been confiscated and destroyed. Justice has been served. The emperor celebrates Lin's success. Surely now the British will see reason and end this immoral trade. From the British perspective, this is outrageous theft. 3 million pounds of government property has been destroyed without compensation. British subjects have been threatened with execution. The representative of Her Majesty has been treated with contempt. National honor demands response. In Parliament, the debate rages. Prime Minister Lord Melbourne opposes war. William Gladstone, the future Prime Minister, delivers a passionate speech against military action. A war more unjust in its origin, a war calculated in its progress to cover this country with permanent disgrace, I do not know and have not read of. But the pro-war faction argues British subjects have been threatened. British property has been stolen. Chinese officials have shown contempt for international law and diplomatic protocol. Britain cannot allow a backward empire to dictate terms to the workshop of the world. National prestige demands action. The economic argument proves decisive. British merchants demand compensation, 3 million pounds. The government owes them nothing if this is simply criminal contraband confiscated by legitimate authorities. But if this is British government property stolen by a hostile foreign power, then compensation is mandatory. The only way to avoid paying merchants is to force China to pay instead, through war. The vote is close, 271 to 262. 9 votes decide the matter. Britain will go to war with China, To force the opium trade to continue, 16 warships, 4,000 troops, modern rifled artillery, steam-powered gunboats that can navigate rivers regardless of wind direction. The British expect a short campaign. Chinese military technology is outdated. Their navy consists of wooden junks that cannot match European gunnery. Their infantry carries matchlock muskets, swords, and bows against British percussion rifles. This will be a demonstration of superior civilization, a lesson in the cost of defying British interests. What the British do not fully grasp is that they are about to shatter a world order 3,000 years old. China is not simply another troublesome colony to be disciplined. It is the center of an entire civilizational system, the Middle Kingdom around which tributary states orbit. For 3 millennia, China has been the dominant power in East Asia. Invaders have conquered it, but the empire always endures, always absorbs the conquerors, always returns. The Qing military prepares to defend the empire as it always has. Courage, numbers, traditional tactics. Commissioner Lin is confident. He has studied Western capabilities and believes Chinese forces can hold. The coastal forts mount heavy cannons. The numbers favor China, and surely heaven's mandate protects the righteous. But Lin does not understand the revolution in naval warfare. He does not grasp what steam power means. Chinese cannons are fixed fortifications requiring defenders to wait for ships to enter range. British steam gunboats can position themselves anywhere, fire at will, withdraw before effective Chinese response. Chinese ships cannot maneuver without favorable wind. British steamers ignore wind entirely. The technological gap is not merely quantitative, it is categorical. This is not a fair fight between slightly unmatched armies. This is the collision of early modern and early industrial militaries. It is the moment when 300 years of European scientific and technological development, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the beginnings of industrialization, meet an empire that has remained largely unchanged since the Qing Dynasty. June 18, 1840. The British fleet arrives off Guangzhou. Commissioner Lin refuses to negotiate. The British move north, up the coast. They blockade the Yangtze River, the main artery of internal Chinese trade. They capture the Zhoushan Islands. They shell coastal forts. Chinese defenders fight bravely, die in large numbers, achieve nothing. The pattern repeats endlessly. Chinese forces occupy strong defensive positions. British steamers position themselves at optimal range. British artillery reduces fortifications to rubble. British Marines storm the ruins. Chinese casualties are catastrophic. British casualties are minimal. At the Battle of the Bogue, Chinese forces mount a determined defense. War junks chained together to block the channel. Soldiers committed to fight to the end. The British steam through the blockade, destroy the fleet, reduce the forts, and capture 600 cannons. Chinese casualties, 500. British casualties, 5. The war becomes a nightmare catalog of one-sided battles. The Chinese discover that courage without technology is simply death. Soldiers charge British positions with traditional weapons and are cut down by disciplined rifle fire. Naval vessels attempt ramming attacks and are sunk by long-range artillery. Coastal cities watch helplessly as British ships bombard them from positions beyond reach of Chinese guns. Emperor Daoguang receives reports he cannot believe. How can barbarians— the British are classified as barbarians in Chinese imperial taxonomy— defeat the Celestial Empire so easily? The reports must be exaggerated. The generals must be incompetent. He dismisses commanders, appoints replacements, demands victory. The defeats continue. In the Forbidden City, the emperor faces impossible choices. His forces cannot stop the British. His economy is collapsing under the dual pressure of opium addiction and war expenditure. His officials recommend negotiation. But negotiation means accepting unequal terms. It means admitting the barbarians are stronger than the Celestial Empire. It means shattering the cosmic order that has governed East Asia for millennia. The British advance north. They threaten Nanjing, the southern capital, one of China's greatest cities. If Nanjing falls, they can move on the Grand Canal. Control of the canal means control of China's internal trade, its grain distribution, its administrative communications. The empire can survive losing coastal forts. It cannot survive losing the Grand Canal. August 1842. Chinese negotiators meet British officials aboard HMS Cornwallis in Nanjing Harbor. The first of what will be called the unequal treaties is signed. The Treaty of Nanjing. The terms are devastating. China must pay 21 million silver dollars in reparations, compensation for destroyed opium, costs of the war, merchant debts. Hong Kong Island is ceded to Britain in perpetuity. 5 ports— Guangzhou, Fuzhou, Xiamen, Ningbo, and Shanghai— must open to British trade and residents. Tariffs are fixed at low rates that China cannot change. British subjects accused of crimes in China will be tried by British consular courts, not Chinese law. The treaty does not mention opium. Technically, opium remains illegal, but with ports open and British subjects beyond Chinese legal jurisdiction, enforcement becomes impossible. The opium trade will actually accelerate after the war ends. Most catastrophically, the treaty includes a most favored nation clause. Any privilege China grants to any other foreign power must automatically extend to Britain. This clause will be copied by every subsequent treaty. It creates a ratchet effect. Each concession to any foreign power automatically applies to all foreign powers. China's sovereignty will be dismantled piece by piece. The treaty ports transform overnight. Shanghai, previously a modest walled city, becomes a boom town. Foreign merchants flood in. Western architecture rises along the waterfront. British law, British currency, British customs prevail in designated zones. The foreign settlements are islands of extraterritorial sovereignty within Chinese soil. The opium trade explodes. Without the need for smuggling, the volume increases dramatically. By 1850, imports reach 60,000 chests annually. That is 8,400,000 pounds of opium, enough to supply approximately 10 million regular users. The addiction epidemic spreads deeper into Chinese society. The silver drain accelerates. The empire's economy spirals further into crisis. Taxes become uncollectible. Government salaries go unpaid. Infrastructure collapses. The Grand Canal silts up from lack of maintenance. Flood control systems fail. Harvests rot because transport networks have broken down. In the countryside, the Qing Dynasty's legitimacy evaporates. The emperor rules by the mandate of heaven, a Confucian principle that links cosmic order to good governance. When the government protects the people, maintains infrastructure, ensures justice, collects fair taxes, heaven grants legitimacy. When government fails these duties, heaven withdraws the mandate. Rebellion becomes not just permitted, but cosmically necessary. The signs of lost mandate are everywhere. Floods devastate the Yellow River Basin. The government cannot afford repairs. Famines spread. The distribution system has collapsed. Bandits roam freely. Local authorities cannot maintain order. Taxes increase while services vanish. Corruption has become systematic. And opium destroys families while foreign powers carve spheres of influence. 1850. A failed civil service examination candidate named Hong Xiuquan declares himself the younger brother of Jesus Christ. He has visions. God has given him a mission: destroy the Qing Dynasty, the demons who have led China astray, and establish the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, a Christian theocracy purged of Confucian corruption, opium addiction, and Manchu rule. His message resonates. The desperate, the dispossessed, the opium-destroyed families, the overtaxed peasants, the unemployed soldiers, they flock to his banner. Hong promises land redistribution, gender equality, prohibition of opium, alcohol, and tobacco, an end to foot binding, destruction of the corrupt Qing order, and restoration of heavenly harmony. Within months, he commands thousands. Within a year, hundreds of thousands. By 1851, the Taiping Rebellion is a full-scale civil war that will kill more people than any conflict before the 20th century. March 1853. The Taiping capture Nanjing and declare it the heavenly capital of their new kingdom. 1 million people live under Taiping rule. Hong Xiuquan establishes a theocratic government based on his interpretation of Christianity, mixed with Chinese messianic traditions. Land is redistributed. The civil service examinations are abolished. Women are given leadership roles. Opium dealers are executed. The Qing Dynasty faces existential crisis. Half the empire is in rebellion. The treasury is empty. The military is demoralized. Foreign powers control the treaty ports, and the British are preparing for another war. The Second Opium War begins in 1856 over a minor incident. Chinese officials board a Chinese-owned ship flying the British flag and arrest suspected pirates. The British claim violation of their flag. China claims legitimate law enforcement. Neither side will back down. This war is even more one-sided than the first. Britain is joined by France. Together they deploy modern rifled artillery, ironclad warships, explosive shells. The technological gap has widened further. Chinese defenses that might have held against First Opium War weapons are annihilated by mid-century European firepower. The Allied forces capture the Taku forts, protecting the approach to Beijing. They threaten the capital itself. Emperor Shanfeng, Dao Guang's son, now ruling a collapsing empire, flees to Manchuria. Chinese negotiators desperately try to arrange terms. October 1860, British and French forces reach Beijing. They discover the old summer palace, Yuan, the emperor's private retreat and one of the greatest architectural achievements in Chinese history. 150 years of accumulated treasures, libraries containing irreplaceable texts, art collections spanning dynasties, gardens designed by Jesuit architects blending Chinese and European aesthetics. The troops loot for 3 days. Then British High Commissioner Lord Elgin orders the entire complex burned as punishment for Chinese treatment of captured prisoners. French commander protests. This is barbarism, destruction of cultural heritage. Elgin is unmoved. The palace must burn to teach China the cost of defying European powers. Smoke visible for miles. Centuries of art, literature, architecture reduced to ash and charred ruins. The act shocks even many Europeans. Victor Hugo will later write, "One day, 2 bandits entered the summer palace. One plundered, the other burned. Before history, one of the 2 bandits will be called France, the other England." The Treaty of Tientsin and the Convention of Peking that end the Second Opium War are even more devastating than the Treaty of Nanjing. China must pay 8 million taels in reparations to Britain, 6 million to France. 11 more ports must open to foreign trade. Foreign diplomats will reside permanently in Beijing, a profound violation of traditional Chinese protocol. Foreign ships can navigate the Yangtze River freely. Opium is legalized and taxed. Most significantly, Britain takes Kowloon Peninsula, the mainland territory across from Hong Kong Island. The foreign territorial presence in China expands, and the precedent is set. When China is weak, foreign powers simply take what they want. After the Second Opium War, opium is no longer contraband. It is a legal import, taxed and regulated. British merchants operate openly. Chinese officials collect duties. The trade that destroyed Commissioner Lin Zexu's career is now official government policy. The absurdity would be comedic if the human cost were not so catastrophic. Import volumes reach 87,000 chests by 1879. That is 12,180,000 pounds of opium annually. Conservative estimates suggest 15 million regular users. Some scholars argue the number reaches 25 million. 1 in 15 Chinese people is addicted to opium. The economic devastation continues. Silver drainage accelerates. The empire's currency system collapses. The government cannot collect adequate revenue. It cannot pay its armies. It cannot maintain infrastructure. The Grand Canal, that marvel of engineering that sustained Chinese civilization for over 1,000 years, silts beyond repair because the government cannot afford maintenance. The addiction economy creates a perverse agricultural cycle. Chinese farmers begin growing opium domestically. The crop is more profitable than grain. A farmer can earn 3 times as much from poppies as from rice. Provincial governments encourage cultivation. They tax the opium and desperately need revenue. By the 1880s, domestic Chinese opium production exceeds imports. The British complain. Chinese-grown opium cuts into their market share. The irony escapes no one. Britain forced opium on China to correct a trade imbalance. Now China grows so much opium that British imports decline. The empire has become the world's largest opium producer, but domestic production means even cheaper opium. more widespread addiction, and agricultural land diverted from food to drugs. Provinces that should export grain to famine regions instead export opium. The food distribution system collapses further. The empire's institutions crumble from within. The civil service examination system, which has selected China's governing class for over 1,300 years, produces fewer qualified candidates. Opium addiction among scholars reaches epidemic levels. Young men who should be studying classics are smoking pipes. Families that should invest in education spend fortunes feeding addictions. Those who do pass examinations often arrive at their posts already addicted. Officials supposed to govern provinces, collect taxes, maintain order, administer justice. They spend their days in opium dens. Corruption becomes systematic not from moral failure alone, but from financial necessity. Addicted officials sell positions, accept bribes, embezzle taxes to feed cravings. The military deteriorates even faster. Soldiers are paid in silver that buys less each year due to currency collapse. Many supplement income by selling their weapons, deserting, or turning to banditry. Officers are often opium users themselves. Training stops. Discipline vanishes. The Eight Banner forces the elite Manchu military system that conquered China becomes a hollow shell. While China's military rots from within, the foreign powers grow stronger. Japan, which witnessed China's humiliation and learned from it, rapidly modernizes. The Meiji Restoration transforms Japan from feudal isolation to industrial power in a single generation. They study Western military organization, adopt Western technology, build modern industries. They watch China's weakness with calculated interest. Russia expands into Central Asia and eyes Manchuria. France moves into Southeast Asia, establishing protectorates over Vietnam and Cambodia, traditional Chinese tributary states. Germany, recently unified, seeks colonial possessions and eyes Chinese coastal territories. Even the United States, preoccupied with westward expansion, begins demanding treaty port access. The scramble for China accelerates. Each foreign power demands concessions, railway rights, spheres of influence where their nationals have privileged access. Treaty ports expand from 5 to dozens. Foreign gunboats patrol Chinese rivers as if they own them. And the most favored nation clause ensures every concession granted to one power automatically extends to all. The Qing court faces impossible diplomatic pressures. Every negotiation begins from weakness. Foreign powers know China cannot enforce its own laws in treaty ports. They know the military is ineffective. They know the treasury is empty. So they demand, and China concedes, and the empire shrinks piece by piece. The psychological impact devastates Chinese identity. For millennia, China was the Middle Kingdom, the civilized center surrounded by barbarian periphery. Emperors received tribute from lesser states. Chinese culture, technology, and governance were universally acknowledged as superior. This was not arrogance, but observable fact confirmed over centuries. Now the barbarians dictate terms, force trade, seize territory, impose unequal treaties, station troops in the capital. The cosmic order has inverted, and the catalyst, the weapon that enabled this reversal, was opium. A generation of Chinese intellectuals watches the collapse and asks desperate questions. How did the Middle Kingdom fall so far? What did the West discover that China missed? Can Chinese civilization modernize without losing its soul? Is Western learning compatible with Chinese values, or must China choose between identity and survival? The self-strengthening movement emerges. Reformers argue China must adopt Western technology while preserving Chinese cultural essence, build modern industries, create Western-style military, establish technical schools, send students abroad. The formula: Chinese learning for fundamental principles, Western learning for practical application. They achieve modest successes. The Jiangnan arsenal produces modern weapons. The Fuzhou Navy Yard builds steamships. Telegraph lines connect major cities. Some young Chinese study in Europe and America, returning with engineering degrees and modern ideas. But fundamental reform is blocked by conservative court officials, insufficient funding, and the structural rote opium has caused. Every modernization program competes with addiction for resources. Every reform must navigate a bureaucracy where many officials are opium users. Every initiative struggles in an economy drained of silver and functional capacity. By 1894, China possesses Asia's largest navy. The Beiyang fleet includes modern battleships purchased from Germany and Britain. On paper, China's military modernization appears successful. The fleet looks impressive. The generals promise victory. The court believes the self-strengthening movement has restored Chinese power. Then, Japan attacks. The First Sino-Japanese War begins over Korea, a traditional Chinese tributary state that Japan also claims influence over. The war will reveal that China's modernization is largely facade. The ships are modern, but the training is inadequate. The weapons are advanced, but the tactics are outdated. The organization chart looks Western, but corruption and opium addiction riddle the actual command structure. The Battle of the Yalu River shatters Chinese naval power. Japan's fleet is better trained, better commanded, better coordinated. Chinese ships fight bravely, but ineffectively. Communication breaks down. Formation discipline collapses. Ammunition supplies prove corrupted. Officials had embezzled funds, replacing shells with sand or inferior powder. Ships purchased from Europe are poorly maintained because maintenance budgets were stolen. The Beiyang fleet retreats to Port Arthur. Japan pursues. Over the following months, Japanese forces systematically destroy the bases, capture the fortress, and annihilate what remains of China's modern navy. The self-strengthening movement's flagship achievement literally sinks into the Yellow Sea. On land, the war proves equally catastrophic. Japanese forces invade Manchuria. Chinese armies, despite numerical superiority, are routed. The gap is not primarily technological. Both sides use similar weapons. The gap is organizational, tactical, and leadership. Japan modernized its entire military system. China purchased modern weapons, but retained traditional command structures riddled with corruption and opium addiction. April 17th, 1895. The Treaty of Shimonoseki. The terms are devastating. China must recognize Korean independence, meaning Korea leaves the Chinese tributary system and falls under Japanese influence. China must cede Taiwan and the Penghu Islands to Japan. China must cede the Liaodong Peninsula, though European powers will later force Japan to return it, only for Russia to seize it. China must open 4 more treaty ports. China must pay 200 million taels in war reparations. But the deepest wound is psychological. Japan, a nation China considered culturally inferior, a civilization that learned writing, Buddhism, and state organization from China, has decisively defeated the Middle Kingdom. The student has conquered the teacher. The tributary has subjugated the suzerain. The cosmic order is shattered. Chinese intellectuals cannot ignore the implications. Japan modernized successfully in 1 generation. China attempted modernization and failed catastrophically. The difference cannot be blamed on technology alone. Both nations accessed the same Western weapons and ships. The difference lies in fundamental reform. Japan transformed its entire society, economy, government, military, and education system. China tried to preserve traditional structures while adding modern weapons. Surface modernization without systemic change proved worthless. The defeat triggers the 100 Days Reform of 1898. The young Guangxu emperor, who has watched his empire disintegrate, allies with radical reformers led by Kang Youwei and Liang Qichao. They propose comprehensive transformation, establish a constitutional monarchy, modernize education by ending the classical examination system, create Western-style universities, abolish sinecure positions, reform the military completely, encourage industry and commerce, protect civil liberties. For 103 days, reform edicts pour from the emperor's study. Universities are chartered, old institutions are abolished, modern ministries are established. The reformers work frantically, knowing conservative opposition will mobilize. They hope to implement so many changes so quickly that reversal becomes impossible. They underestimate the Empress Dowager Cixi. September 21st, 1898. Cixi stages a coup. She places the Guangxu emperor under house arrest in the palace. He will remain prisoner until his death 10 years later. She declares herself regent and voids the reform edicts. The 100 Days Reform ends, and 6 leading reformers are arrested and executed. Kang Youwei and Liang Qichao flee to Japan. Cixi represents the conservative faction that believes reform threatens the Qing Dynasty's survival. She sees the reformers not as patriots trying to save China, but as radicals undermining legitimate authority. The constitutional monarchy they propose would limit imperial power. Ending the examination system would destroy the scholar gentry class that supports the throne. Western ideas threaten Confucian hierarchy. Her victory ensures China will not modernize through top-down imperial reform. The window closes. The empire will limp forward with surface changes. A modern gun here, a railway there, but no fundamental transformation. And time is running out. 1900. The Boxer Rebellion explodes across northern China. The Boxers, properly called the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists, are a folk religious movement that blames foreigners for China's collapse. They believe ritual practices and martial arts training grant magical immunity to bullets. They attack Christian missionaries, Chinese Christian converts, foreign engineers building railways, and anyone associated with Western presence. The movement spreads like wildfire through desperate populations. Decades of opium addiction, economic collapse, foreign humiliation, and government failure have created a powder keg. The Boxers provide simple explanations and dramatic action. China suffers because foreigners have violated the natural order. Drive out the foreign devils, destroy Western technology and religion, and heaven will restore harmony. Cixi makes a catastrophic calculation. She sees the Boxers as useful allies against foreign pressure. Rather than suppressing them, she offers tacit support. Conservative officials encourage the movement. Some provincial governors arm Boxer units. The court issues ambiguous orders that many interpret as imperial approval for anti-foreign violence. June 20th, 1900. The Boxers and imperial troops begin besieging the foreign legation quarter in Beijing. Over 2,000 foreigners and several thousand Chinese Christian refugees are trapped inside. For 55 days, they hold against repeated attacks. Food runs low, water becomes scarce, ammunition dwindles, makeshift hospitals overflow with wounded. The defenders expect annihilation. Cixi has committed an unthinkable act. She has declared war on all foreign powers simultaneously. 8 nations, Britain, France, Germany, Russia, Japan, United States, Italy, and Austria-Hungary form an unprecedented alliance. The 8-nation alliance assembles forces and marches on Beijing to relieve the siege. The intervention force is relatively small, approximately 50,000 troops, but faces a Chinese military that exists more on paper than in reality. Qing forces that should number in the hundreds of thousands have largely disintegrated through desertion, corruption, and opium addiction. The Boxers, despite their fervent belief in magical invulnerability, discover that bullets kill regardless of ritual preparation. The 8-nation alliance advances rapidly. The Battle of Tientsin, the capture of Taku forts, the march on Beijing. Chinese resistance collapses at every encounter. The technological and organizational gap has widened further since the Opium Wars. This is 1900, not 1840. The foreign powers now deploy magazine rifles, modern artillery, coordinated combined arms tactics. The Chinese military, riddled with corruption and addiction, offers sporadic resistance before dissolving. August 14th, 1900, the 8-nation alliance enters Beijing. The siege is broken. The foreigners are rescued. The Boxers are scattered. Empress Dowager Cixi flees the capital disguised as a peasant woman, a stunning humiliation for the ruler of the Celestial Empire. She leaves behind a city about to be systematically looted by foreign troops. For weeks, foreign troops loot Beijing. The Forbidden City, the sacred heart of Chinese imperial power, forbidden to ordinary subjects for 500 years, is ransacked by foreign soldiers who photograph themselves sitting on the dragon throne. Imperial treasures accumulated over dynasties are stolen or destroyed. Libraries are burned. Palaces are vandalized. The systematic plunder is documented in photographs that will haunt Chinese national memory for generations. The provinces suffer worse. Foreign troops engage in punitive expeditions against villages suspected of supporting Boxers. Summary executions, Mass punishments, indiscriminate violence, the line between legitimate military action and revenge atrocity blurs completely. Casualty estimates vary wildly, but tens of thousands of Chinese civilians die in the suppression and its aftermath. September 7, 1901, the Boxer Protocol is signed. The terms represent China's complete humiliation. The empire must pay 450 million taels in reparations over 39 years, the largest indemnity in history to that point. With interest, the total exceeds 980 million taels. China's customs revenue is placed under foreign control to ensure payment. Foreign troops will permanently garrison Beijing and the route to the coast. The foreign legation quarter becomes a fortified zone under foreign military control. Chinese fortifications between Beijing and the sea are demolished. Arms imports are restricted, but the most profound clause prohibits China from ever again organizing anti-foreign movements. The empire cannot protect itself against foreign influence without violating the protocol. Sovereignty has become conditional on foreign approval. The Boxer catastrophe cements China's status as a semi-colony. The empire retains nominal independence and territorial integrity, but only because the foreign powers cannot agree on how to divide it. Each nation fears giving rivals too much advantage, so they maintain a weak Chinese government they can all exploit rather than risk partition that might trigger war among themselves. The treaty ports flourish while the countryside collapses. Shanghai becomes one of the most modern cities in Asia, but under foreign control. Western banks dominate finance. Foreign firms control major industries. Foreign courts administer law for foreign nationals. And, in mixed cases, parks and clubs exclude Chinese. Signs reading, "No dogs or Chinese allowed," become symbols of national humiliation. Yet, paradoxically, the treaty ports also become centers of Chinese modernization. Protected from Qing government interference, Chinese entrepreneurs establish modern businesses. Intellectuals publish reformist newspapers. Students organize political movements. Revolutionary ideas circulate freely because Chinese authorities cannot enforce censorship in foreign-controlled zones. The opium trade continues unabated. By 1900, China produces more opium domestically than it imports. The British still export Indian opium, approximately 50,000 chests annually. But Chinese-grown opium floods the market even more. Provincial governments tax the trade heavily, becoming financially dependent on opium revenue. Approximately 15 to 20% of Chinese men are estimated to be regular opium users. The addiction economy is now woven into government finance, agricultural systems, and social customs. 1906 to 1911. The Qing Dynasty finally launches a comprehensive anti-opium campaign. 67 years after Commissioner Lin's Exus destroyed opium sparked the First Opium War. The effort is genuine but comes far too late. The imperial government mandates reduction in domestic poppy cultivation, provides funding for addiction treatment, licenses physicians to help addicts withdraw, punishes dealers. Britain, facing international criticism of the opium trade, agrees to reduce Indian opium exports gradually. The Anglo-Chinese Opium Agreement pledges to end the trade completely by 1917. This cooperation seems promising, but the empire has only 3 years left. Chinese revolutionaries have watched the empire's humiliation and drawn conclusions. The Qing Dynasty cannot save China. Manchu rule must end. Only through revolution, throwing out the old system entirely, can China modernize and regain sovereignty. Constitutional monarchy is insufficient. Gradual reform is too slow. The empire must fall. October 10th, 1911. The Wuchang Uprising begins the Xinhai Revolution. Military units mutiny against the Qing. Provincial assemblies declare independence. The revolution spreads rapidly across southern and central China, not through overwhelming military force, but because the empire has lost all legitimacy. Provincial governments simply stop obeying Beijing. The supposedly powerful Qing Dynasty reveals itself as an empty shell. Within weeks, most of China has declared independence from Manchu rule. Revolutionary and constitutionalist forces control the south. The Qing court in Beijing controls little beyond the immediate capital region. The empire's military forces, what remains of them after decades of corruption and neglect, are unreliable. Some units support the revolution. Others remain neutral. Few will fight for the dynasty. February 12, 1912. The 6-year-old Xuantong Emperor, Puyi, who will be known to history as the last emperor, formally abdicates. The Qing Dynasty ends, not through glorious conquest or heroic last stand, but through a frightened child reading an edict written by others, giving up an empire he never truly controlled. The abdication edict is carefully worded. It does not admit military defeat. It claims the emperor is voluntarily transferring power to a republican government for the good of the people. The imperial family retains certain privileges. Puyi will continue living in the Forbidden City, at least temporarily, with a substantial pension. The Manchu aristocracy negotiates terms to protect their positions and property. It is a managed decline, not a revolutionary purge. But the empire is gone. The system that governed China for over 2,000 years, the mandate of heaven, the Son of Heaven ruling through Confucian bureaucracy, has ended. The Middle Kingdom, which regarded itself as the civilized center of the world, has become the Republic of China, one nation among many, struggling to find its place in a world order it did not create and does not control. The Republic inherits a broken nation. The opium crisis continues. Addiction rates remain catastrophic despite ongoing suppression efforts. The economy is shattered. Infrastructure is crumbling. Foreign powers still control treaty ports and extract privileges. The indemnities from previous wars continue draining resources. Regional warlords control provinces, fighting each other for power while nominally acknowledging the central government. But something has changed psychologically. The fall of the Qing breaks a mental barrier. If the ancient dynasty could fall, anything could change. Chinese intellectuals, students, and reformers embrace radical ideas: democracy, science, women's rights, individual liberty. Nothing is sacred anymore. Everything can be questioned and reformed. The new culture movement emerges. Intellectuals attack Confucianism as the root of China's stagnation. They advocate embracing Western science and democracy completely. They call for vernacular Chinese language replacing classical literary forms, making education accessible. They demand gender equality. and ending arranged marriage. China must destroy the old completely to build something new. May 4th, 1919. Students demonstrate in Beijing, protesting the Treaty of Versailles. China fought in World War I on the Allied side. Chinese laborers served in Europe. China expected the peace settlement would restore territories and rights. Instead, the treaty transfers German concessions in Shandong province to Japan, another foreign power taking Chinese territory. The demonstration ignites a nationwide movement. Students strike, merchants close shops, workers walk out. The May 4th movement becomes a turning point in Chinese political consciousness. A generation rejects the idea that foreign powers can simply dictate China's fate. They demand national sovereignty, political participation, and an end to humiliating, unequal treaties. This generation has grown up watching opium destroy families, foreign powers carve spheres of influence, and corrupt officials betray the nation. They have watched reform efforts fail and revolutions create chaos instead of order. They are losing patience with gradual change and incremental improvement. Some turn to nationalism, others to socialism, many to communism. The Russian Revolution offers a model for rapid revolutionary transformation. The Communist Party of China is founded in 1921 by intellectuals who believe only complete systemic revolution can save the nation. The 1920s see competing visions for China's future clash violently. The Nationalist Party, Kuomintang, led by Chiang Kai-shek after Sun Yat-sen's death, seeks to reunify China under a modernizing nationalist government. They build a professional military. They forge temporary alliance with the communists to defeat regional warlords. They promise to end the unequal treaties and restore Chinese sovereignty. The communists organize workers and peasants. They promise land redistribution and social revolution. They see the nationalists as bourgeois reformers who will compromise with foreign powers and domestic elites instead of transforming society fundamentally. The temporary alliance shatters. 1927. The Shanghai Massacre. Nationalist forces turn on their communist allies in a violent purge. Thousands of communists and labor activists are hunted down and executed. The communists flee to rural areas and begin organizing peasant revolution. China descends into civil war even while foreign threats intensify. The communists survive nationalist suppression campaigns by retreating deeper into rural areas and building support among the poorest peasants. They offer land redistribution, the most powerful promise imaginable, to landless farmers. They establish base areas with disciplined military forces and revolutionary governance. They endure the long march, a strategic retreat across thousands of miles that becomes a founding myth of revolutionary endurance. Meanwhile, Japan grows increasingly aggressive. The Manchurian Incident in 1931. Japan seizes Manchuria and establishes the puppet state of Manchukuo. The League of Nations protests. Japan withdraws from the League and continues expansion. 1937. The Marco Polo Bridge incident triggers full-scale Japanese invasion of China. The Second Sino-Japanese War merges into World War II. Japanese forces capture Beijing, Shanghai, Nanjing. The Nanjing Massacre, mass atrocities against civilians that shock the world. The nationalist government retreats inland. to Chongqing. The Communists wage guerrilla warfare in occupied territories. China suffers catastrophic casualties. Estimates range from 15 to 20 million dead, but refuses to surrender. China endures. The nationalist government continues functioning from Chongqing despite relentless Japanese bombing. The Communists expand their base areas in occupied territories, building support while fighting both Japanese and preparing for eventual showdown with nationalists. The Chinese people suffer enormously but do not break. The war finally ends. August 1945. Japan surrenders. China emerges victorious but devastated. Infrastructure destroyed. Economy shattered. Casualties overwhelming. And the Civil War immediately resumes between nationalists and communists. The communist victory comes surprisingly quickly. The nationalists are exhausted from war, riddled with corruption, losing popular support. The communists have built effective military forces and genuine peasant base. By 1949, the nationalists retreat to Taiwan. The communists control the mainland. October 1st, 1949, Mao Zedong stands at Tiananmen Gate and proclaims, "The Chinese people have stood up. The People's Republic of China is founded." The Communist Revolution achieves victory. A new chapter begins. Or so it seems. The Communists inherit the same broken nation the Qing Dynasty collapsed from, and the Republic struggled with. The economy is devastated. Infrastructure is primitive. Industry is minimal. Foreign powers, now including the United States supporting Taiwan, remain hostile. The Soviet Union offers alliance but also seeks to dominate its junior communist partner. And the opium crisis? Still present. Decades of addiction do not vanish with political revolution. Millions remain dependent. Domestic cultivation continues in some regions. The new government must confront the same poison that helped destroy the Qing Dynasty. The communist approach to opium is characteristically totalitarian and remarkably effective. Mass campaigns, mandatory registration of all users, forced treatment programs, execution of major dealers and traffickers, eradication of poppy cultivation through land reform, and agricultural collectivization, complete social mobilization to identify and treat addicts. The methods are harsh. Civil liberties are non-existent. But within a decade, the communists largely succeed where the Qing Dynasty and Republic failed. Opium addiction rates plummet. Domestic cultivation is suppressed almost entirely. The drug trade is broken. The addiction crisis that contributed to imperial collapse is finally ended through revolutionary authority, willing to use unlimited state power. The irony is profound. The opium crisis helped destroy Chinese imperial authority, contributed to foreign domination, and weakened the nation for a century. The Communist Revolution, which emerges partly from China's weakness and humiliation, finally solves the opium crisis through methods the old empire could never have employed. Totalitarian control accomplishes what Confucian governance could not. The communist transformation is comprehensive and violent. Land reform redistributes property from landlords to peasants, but through brutal struggle sessions where former landlords are publicly humiliated, beaten, sometimes executed. Between 1 and 2 million landlords and class enemies are estimated killed during land reform. The social structure that existed for millennia is shattered through revolutionary violence. Agricultural collectivization follows. Individual farms are merged into cooperatives, then communes. The goal is rapid industrialization through extracting agricultural surplus to fund factories. The method is totalitarian reorganization of rural life. Traditional villages are transformed into production units. Private property is abolished. The party controls everything. The Great Leap Forward, 1958 to 1962. Mao's catastrophic campaign to rapidly industrialize through mass mobilization and pseudo-scientific agricultural techniques. Backyard steel furnaces, impossible production quotas, agricultural practices based on ideology rather than science. The result is the deadest famine in human history. Estimates range from 15 to 45 million deaths. The Great Leap Forward famine reveals that revolutionary ideology cannot overcome agricultural reality. Forced collectivization disrupts traditional farming knowledge. Impossible quotas encourage false reporting. Officials claim harvests that do not exist. Grain is confiscated from villages to feed cities and export for foreign exchange, while peasants starve. Those who object are labeled rightists and punished. The totalitarian system that solved the opium crisis creates an even worse disaster through ideological rigidity. The famine finally forces policy retreat. Mao steps back from direct administration. More pragmatic leaders like Deng Xiaoping implement modest reforms. Agricultural policy becomes slightly more realistic. The worst is over, but the trauma scars Chinese society, and Mao, watching from semi-retirement, begins planning his return. 1966, the Cultural Revolution begins. Mao launches a campaign to purge supposed capitalist and traditional elements from Chinese society and reassert his personal authority. He mobilizes youth as Red Guards, students empowered to attack teachers, destroy cultural artifacts, humiliate intellectuals, and terrorize anyone deemed insufficiently revolutionary. The campaign spirals into chaos. Schools close. Students spend years denouncing rather than learning. Intellectuals are sent to countryside for re-education through labor. Cultural treasures are destroyed. Libraries burned. Ancient temples vandalized. Anyone with education, expertise, or cultural refinement becomes a target. The revolution devours its own achievements. The Cultural Revolution lasts officially until 1976. Though the worst violence occurs in the first years, estimates suggest between 400,000 to 20 million excess deaths, depending on what is included. Countless more are persecuted, traumatized, or have their lives destroyed. An entire generation loses education. The economy stagnates. Scientific and technological development halts. September 9th, 1976, Mao Zedong dies. The revolutionary leader who unified China under communist rule, who modernized certain aspects while destroying others, who created totalitarian control that solved some problems while creating worse disasters. His death ends an era. Within weeks, the Gang of Four, Mao's radical supporters, including his widow, are arrested. The Cultural Revolution officially ends. Pragmatic leaders emerge. Deng Xiaoping returns from purging and eventually consolidates power. He will lead China in completely new directions. 1979. Deng Xiaoping initiates reform and opening, market reforms, and engagement with global capitalism while maintaining Communist Party political control. Special economic zones like Shenzhen are established where capitalist economics can operate. Foreign investment is welcomed. Private entrepreneurship is permitted. The household responsibility system returns land management to families. The slogan captures the pragmatism. It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice. Ideology matters less than results. Economic development becomes the priority. China begins the transformation that will make it the world's second largest economy. The speed is extraordinary. Shenzhen grows from a fishing village of 30,000 to a metropolis of millions in a decade. Coastal cities boom. Foreign factories relocate for cheap labor. Chinese entrepreneurs build businesses. Hundreds of millions are lifted from poverty. The economic miracle dwarfs anything achieved during the revolutionary decades. The transformation is stunning. The nation that was carved into spheres of influence a century ago is now a rising superpower. The economy that was shattered by opium and foreign exploitation is now the world's manufacturing center. The military that was humiliated by foreign powers now fields modern forces. The country that seemed to be disintegrating in 1900 is now asserting itself globally. But the journey has been extraordinarily painful. The Opium Wars and the century they inaugurated cost tens of millions of lives. Imperial collapse, Republican chaos, Japanese invasion, civil war, revolutionary violence, Great Leap famine, cultural revolution. The human price of this transformation is almost incomprehensible. And the questions remain. What if Commissioner Lin had found a different solution in 1839? What if the Qing Dynasty had modernized successfully, like Meiji Japan? What if the opium trade had never poisoned Chinese society and drained its economy? Alternative histories are speculation, but the reality is clear. Opium was the weapon that cracked open the Middle Kingdom, and the wounds took generations to heal. Modern China remembers the Opium Wars and the century of humiliation as foundational trauma. School children learn about Commissioner Lin as a national hero who tried to save China from poison. The unequal treaties are taught as examples of foreign imperialism. The Opium Wars are presented as the beginning of China's darkest era, and the Communist Revolution as its salvation. This national narrative shapes Chinese foreign policy and domestic politics. The memory of weakness and violation drives determination never to be dominated again. Economic development, military modernization, technological advancement, all are pursued partly to ensure the century of humiliation never repeats. The Opium Wars cast long shadows. The irony is that modern China has traveled full circle. The nation that was forced to accept opium imports is now economically powerful enough to dictate terms globally. The country that lost Hong Kong to Britain in Opium War treaties reclaimed it in 1997. The civilization that seemed to be collapsing has reasserted itself with stunning force. We return to where it began. The beach at Human, where Commissioner Lin destroyed 20,000 chests of opium in 1839. the act that triggered the First Opium War, the decision that seemed so obviously righteous, destroying poison flooding into China, but that Britain used as justification for war. Stand here at sunset and the question haunts, was there ever a path that avoided the catastrophe? Could the Qing Dynasty have modernized fast enough to resist foreign pressure? Could some diplomatic solution have prevented the wars? Or was the collision between an expanding industrial West and a static agricultural empire inevitable? With opium merely the weapon of convenience, history offers no answers, only consequences. The opium trade destroyed the Qing Dynasty's economy and legitimacy. The Opium Wars shattered China's self-perception as the civilized center of the world. The unequal treaties carved the empire into spheres of foreign influence. The addiction crisis weakened Chinese society for generations. The humiliation drove revolutionary movements that eventually overthrew the imperial system entirely. From opium to revolution, from the world's richest empire to the sick man of Asia to rising superpower. The journey took 150 years and cost tens of millions of lives. The Qing Dynasty fell not from one cause, but from accumulated pressures. Opium was simply the crack that let all the others flood in. The mountains that watched the Qing Dynasty rise and fall remain. The rivers that carried opium ships flow still. The land that supported 350 million subjects in 1800 now holds over 1,400 million. Dynasties collapse, empires dissolve, nations transform, but the civilization continues. Perhaps that is the deeper lesson. China's crisis was profound, but not fatal. The empire fell, but the nation survived. The century of humiliation was genuine trauma, but not permanent defeat. From the ashes of the Qing Dynasty, new forms emerged. Some brought disaster, revolutionary extremism, totalitarian violence, ideological famine. Others brought recovery, pragmatic reform, economic development, renewed strength. The opium that helped destroy the empire is long gone from Chinese society. The addiction crisis that weakened millions is resolved. The unequal treaties that carved up sovereignty are abrogated. The foreign concessions are returned. Hong Kong is back. The century of humiliation has ended, at least in Chinese perception. But the memory remains, embedded in national consciousness, taught to school children, referenced in political speeches, used to justify policies, and warn against weakness. The Opium Wars and their consequences created modern Chinese nationalism, the determination never again to be dominated, never again to be weak, never again to face what the Qing Dynasty endured. And so the story of opium's destruction of China's greatest empire becomes not just history, but founding myth, the trauma that must be remembered to prevent its return, the humiliation that drives perpetual vigilance, the century that must never repeat. The throne sits empty. No son of heaven will occupy it again. The mandate has passed from emperors to republics to Communist Party secretaries. The system that governed China for 2 millennia ended, and in its ending, China transformed completely. Was opium the cause of imperial collapse? No single factor topples civilizations. But It was the weapon that exposed every weakness: economic, military, social, political. The drug trade drained silver, addicted millions, corrupted officials, weakened military forces, and demonstrated the dynasty's inability to protect its people. When Commissioner Lin destroyed the opium, he triggered a war that revealed China's technological backwardness. The subsequent defeats shattered the ideological foundation of imperial authority. From that moment, the question was not whether the Qing Dynasty would fall, but when and what would replace it. The answer took 72 years and cost millions of lives. Republic, warlords, revolution, foreign invasion, civil war, communist, victory, reform, and finally, a modern China that remembers the century of humiliation as its defining trauma. The sun sets over the Forbidden City. The tourists have departed. The throne remains, a memorial to ended empire and testimony to survival. China outlasted its dynasty. The civilization proved more durable than any particular government. And perhaps that is the ultimate answer to how the opium trade destroyed China's greatest empire. It did not destroy China, it destroyed the Qing Dynasty. China endured. The night settles softly over Beijing, over the ruins at Yunmingyuan, over the memorial at Humen, over the mountains and rivers that have watched so many dynasties rise and fall. The story sleeps. The empire is gone, but China remains. And perhaps, as the darkness gathers, that is enough. The story ends where stories do, in memory, in lessons learned at terrible cost, in the quiet knowledge that civilizations can survive their governments, nations can outlast their traumas, and even the deepest wounds eventually scar. The wind whispers through the Forbidden City. The empty throne holds its silence. And somewhere in the vast Chinese night, history becomes memory. Memory becomes teaching. And the century of humiliation transforms into determination that such an era will never return. Sleep now. The story is told. The empire has fallen and risen in new forms. And in the darkness, time moves forward, carrying with it the lessons of opium, empire, and endurance. The opium story did not end with China's recovery. The drug that helped destroy the Qing Dynasty continues its global journey in transformed ways. Afghanistan became the world's largest opium producer. 90% of global heroin originates there. The Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia still cultivates poppies. Latin American cartels produce synthetic opioids. The addiction crisis has simply moved to different populations. The United States, which participated in forcing opium on China during the 19th century, now faces its own opioid epidemic. Prescription painkillers, heroin, fentanyl. Over 100,000 Americans die annually from opioid overdoses. The irony is bitter. The nation that helped Britain defend opium trade now struggles with pharmaceutical companies that created addiction through legal prescriptions, then watched it spiral into illegal drug crises. The parallels are uncomfortable. Opium in Qing China, legal substance becoming addiction, epidemic draining national resources, and destroying families. Opioids in modern America, prescription medications becoming epidemic, destroying communities, and overwhelming healthcare systems. Different centuries, different forms, same fundamental pattern. Commercial interests creating addiction, governments struggling to respond, families disintegrating under chemical dependency. The human experience of addiction is remarkably consistent across time and geography. The 19th century Chinese opium user and the 21st century American opioid addict face similar demons: the chemical hijacking of brain chemistry, the progressive need for higher doses, the inability to stop despite understanding consequences, the destruction of relationships, careers, health, the desperate cycle of withdrawal and relapse. Families experience similar devastation across centuries. The Qing Dynasty mother selling possessions to feed her husband's opium habit mirrors the modern American family, watching savings disappear into prescription pills and heroin. The Victorian moralist condemning Chinese weakness while British merchants profit from addiction mirrors the modern pharmaceutical executive claiming to help pain patients while creating dependency for profit. The lesson is universal. Addiction is not moral failure, but chemical dependency, and commercial interests will create addiction if permitted and profitable. Whether British merchants in 1840 or pharmaceutical companies in 2010, the pattern repeats. The response requires acknowledging addiction as medical crisis requiring treatment, not moral condemnation requiring punishment. The international system has transformed completely since the Opium Wars. The 19th century order, European empires simply taking what they wanted from weaker nations through force, is officially dead. The United Nations, international law, sovereignty norms, multilateral institutions, these replace naked imperialism with at least theoretical equality among nations. China participated in creating this new order. Chinese diplomats helped draft the UN Charter. China holds permanent Security Council membership, one of 5 nations with veto power. The nation that was forced to accept unequal treaties now helps write international law. The empire carved into spheres of influence now asserts sovereignty and challenges Western dominance. Yet, tensions persist. China remembers the century of humiliation and views Western pressure on human rights, democracy, trade practices. Through that historical lens, Western nations see a rising authoritarian power challenging liberal international order. The Opium Wars and their aftermath created deep mutual suspicion that shapes contemporary geopolitics. When Western nations criticize Chinese domestic policies, Chinese officials reference historical Western imperialism. When China asserts maritime claims or economic leverage, Western analysts reference the need to constrain authoritarian expansion. The Opium Wars echo through modern diplomacy, history, weaponized in contemporary struggles. China's Belt and Road Initiative, investing trillions in infrastructure across Asia, Africa, and beyond, represents a form of influence the Qing Dynasty never imagined. Rather than receiving foreign railways built to extract resources, China now builds railways for others. Rather than forced to accept foreign loans on humiliating terms, China now extends credit globally. The reversal is complete. Critics call it debt trap diplomacy, creating dependency through infrastructure loans countries cannot repay. Supporters call it development partnership, and alternative to Western-dominated institutions. The debate itself reflects transformed power dynamics. China is strong enough that its initiatives generate global controversy and response. The memory of humiliation drives much of this. Chinese officials explicitly reference the century of weakness when explaining why China must be strong, must develop economically, must project influence. Never again will foreign powers dictate terms. Never again will China be carved into spheres of influence. The trauma has become motivation. Amid the grand historical forces, empires, wars, revolutions, individual families endured. The great-grandmother at this table was born when the Qing Dynasty still ruled. Her grandmother might have lived through the Opium Wars' aftermath. Her parents survived the Republic's chaos and Japanese invasion. She herself survived the Great Leap Famine and Cultural Revolution. Her children benefited from reform and opening. Her great-grandchildren live in prosperous modern China. 4 generations spanning the entire transformation, from empire to superpower, from humiliation to pride, from poverty to middle-class comfort. The historical sweep becomes personal in families like this. The abstract death tolls and political upheavals translate into individual survival and loss. The great-grandmother might remember hunger during the Great Leap Forward. The grandmother remembers being sent to countryside during Cultural Revolution, education interrupted for years. The parents remember reform-era opportunities and rapid change. The children know only peace and prosperity, smartphones, and confident assumptions about China's place in the world. Each generation carries trauma and resilience forward. The great-grandmother's stories, told or untold, shape family identity. The collective memory of hardship creates appreciation for current stability. The national narrative of humiliation and recovery becomes personal family story of survival and advancement. The graves hold millions of stories. Soldiers who died fighting boxers or Japanese or nationalists or communists. Civilians who starved in famines or died in epidemics. Opium addicts who never recovered. Intellectuals persecuted during Cultural Revolution. Peasants who worked themselves to death in poverty. Officials executed in political purges. Ordinary people who simply lived through extraordinary times. Each grave represents a life shaped by the forces we have traced. The Opium Wars created conditions that killed millions indirectly through economic collapse, social disintegration, weakened government, unable to respond to crises. The revolutions and wars killed millions directly. The famines and political campaigns killed millions more. The human cost of China's transformation is incomprehensible in aggregate. It can only be understood one life at a time. But graves also represent survival. For every person who died, others endured and continued. Families survived across generations. The civilization persisted, and eventually, after suffering almost beyond bearing, conditions improved. The graves of recent decades show longer lifespans, better nutrition, less violent deaths. The most recent graves are mostly elderly people dying naturally, a luxury their grandparents could not assume. How the Opium Wars are remembered matters enormously. In Chinese education, they are taught as the beginning of the century of humiliation. Foreign imperialism exploiting Chinese weakness, forcing drugs on unwilling population, carving empire into spheres of influence. This narrative serves contemporary political purposes, justifying authoritarian control as necessary to prevent return to weakness, framing Western criticism as continuation of imperialism, mobilizing nationalism around victimhood and recovery. In Western education, when the Opium Wars are taught at all, the narrative is often different. British imperialism is criticized, but the context emphasizes Chinese resistance to free trade, Qing Dynasty weakness and corruption, the inevitability of China encountering modern world. The same events, different moral frameworks. Neither narrative is complete. The Chinese version often minimizes Qing Dynasty's own failures and the complexity of modernization challenges. The Western version often underplays the moral horror of forcing drug trade through military violence and the lasting damage of colonial exploitation. Truth is complicated, but national narratives prefer clarity. For the students in this classroom, the Opium Wars are both distant history and present politics. Their grandparents or great-grandparents lived through the end of this era. They themselves benefit from the recovery. And the message is clear. Strength is essential. National unity is paramount. Western intentions are suspect. Historical trauma becomes political education. Some things survived every upheaval. Gardens like this were designed during dynasties long before the Qing. They survived the Opium Wars. They survived revolutions. During the Cultural Revolution, many were damaged or destroyed, but many also survived or have been restored. The aesthetic principles, harmony with nature, balanced composition, spaces for contemplation, endure across political systems. This represents something important about Chinese continuity. Governments changed violently. Political systems transformed completely. Economic organization revolutionized multiple times. Yet, certain cultural elements persist. The written language, though simplified, remains recognizable across millennia. Philosophical traditions, though challenged and suppressed, resurface. Aesthetic principles, though periodically attacked, endure. The Opium Wars and Century of Humiliation were ruptures in Chinese history, but not total breaks. The civilization that created these gardens, that developed landscape painting and poetry traditions, that established philosophical schools and literary forms, that civilization was battered but not destroyed. Political systems proved more fragile than cultural identity. Perhaps this is the ultimate lesson. The Qing Dynasty fell. The imperial system ended, but Chinese civilization adapted, transformed, and continued. The government is not the nation. The dynasty is not the civilization. Opium destroyed the empire's political structure, but the cultural foundation proved more durable. Reconciliation with difficult history is possible, but requires honesty from all parties. British institutions increasingly acknowledge the moral horror of the opium trade and colonial exploitation. Chinese institutions increasingly allow nuanced discussion of Qing Dynasty weaknesses alongside foreign aggression. Collaborative historical projects allow both perspectives without demanding either side abandon their truth. The younger generations on both sides often approach this history with less defensive posturing. British students generally view Victorian imperialism as shameful, rather than glorious. Chinese students can acknowledge Qing failures while still feeling pain at foreign exploitation. Historical empathy becomes possible when people do not feel their identity requires defending every ancestral action. This does not erase the harm. Millions died. Generations suffered. The trauma shaped modern China profoundly, but understanding can coexist with acknowledgement of pain. The British scholars working with Chinese colleagues to create balanced historical exhibitions serve reconciliation better than denial or defensiveness. The Chinese willingness to engage rather than simply condemn shows maturity born of recovered strength. The global drug trade continues with different products and routes. Afghanistan supplies 90% of world heroin. Mexican cartels produce synthetic opioids. Chinese chemical companies supply fentanyl precursors. An ironic reversal, where Chinese exports contribute to American addiction crisis. The patterns shift, but the fundamental dynamic persists. Profitable substances create addiction. Trafficking networks emerge. Governments struggle to respond. International cooperation on drug control is complicated by the same forces that complicated responses during the Opium Wars. Economic interests, sovereignty concerns, effectiveness debates. Countries producing drugs often lack capacity to suppress cultivation. Countries consuming drugs struggle between enforcement and treatment approaches. And the profits are enormous, creating powerful criminal organizations and corrupting officials. The lessons from China's opium experience are clear but difficult to implement. Addiction is medical crisis requiring treatment infrastructure. Supply reduction alone is insufficient without demand reduction. Commercial interests will create addiction if profitable and permitted. Effective response requires comprehensive approach, treatment, enforcement, regulation, but knowledge does not equal political will or implementation capacity. What does an individual life mean amid these vast historical forces? The millions who suffered through the Opium Wars and century of humiliation were not abstractions. They were individual people with hopes, fears, loves, losses. Each had a subjective experience as real to them as yours is to you. Each deserved better than to be crushed by forces beyond their control or understanding. The peasant farmer, forced to grow opium instead of food. The young soldier dying in a one-sided battle against technologically superior forces. The mother watching her children starve during famine. The intellectual humiliated during political campaign. The addict unable to break dependency. Each was a complete human being with inner life, relationships, aspirations, and each was swept up in currents they could not individually resist. This is the tragedy of history. Individual goodness or effort often matters less than timing and circumstance. Being born in China in 1800 versus 1950 versus 2000 made all the difference, not character or merit, but historical accident. The forces we have traced, opium trade, foreign imperialism, revolution, war, famine, determined fates more than individual choices. Yet, individuals also shaped these forces. Commissioner Lin's decision to destroy opium triggered the First Opium War. Hong Xiuquan's visions launched the Taiping Rebellion. Cixi's coup ended reform, Mao's ideology created famine. Deng's pragmatism enabled recovery. Individual choices within constrained circumstances had enormous consequences. History is not just impersonal forces, but also individual decisions compounding across millions of people. Buddhist temples in China weathered every crisis we have described. During the Opium Wars, monks still meditated. During revolutions, some temples were destroyed, but others survived. During Cultural Revolution, many were damaged, but not all were erased. And in the end, the spiritual tradition persisted and has been partially restored. Buddhism teaches impermanence. All conditioned things are subject to change and decay. The Qing Dynasty arose from conditions, flourished, then fell when conditions changed. The suffering of the century of humiliation was real but temporary. The current prosperity will also change eventually. Everything is in flux. Political systems, economic conditions, national power. This philosophical perspective offers some comfort amid historical tragedy. The suffering was terrible, but not eternal. The empire fell, but new forms arose. The individuals who suffered are gone, but their descendants survived. Nothing lasts forever, neither suffering nor power, neither humiliation nor glory. This does not diminish pain, but provides perspective on its temporary nature. Attachment to fixed conditions causes suffering. Buddhist philosophy teaches. The Qing Dynasty's attachment to traditional supremacy made the encounter with modern world more painful. The expectation that China would always be central, that the cosmic order was permanent, intensified the trauma of discovering otherwise. Letting go of fixed expectations might have eased the transition, though historical circumstances made adaptation nearly impossible. Every family carries its own history through the national story. The photographs in albums like this document individual lives intersecting with historical forces. The great-great-grandparents who lived under the Qing Dynasty, the great-grandparents who survived the Republic's chaos, the grandparents who endured war and revolution, the parents who navigated reform, the children who inherit both trauma and recovery. These personal histories complicate simple national narratives. Families experienced the same events differently based on class, location, politics, fortune. Some profited from changes. Others found devastating. Some suffered under systems. Others navigated successfully. The landlord's family and the peasant's family remember land reform very differently. The communist cadre's family and the persecuted intellectual's family tell different stories about cultural revolution, yet all share the common experience of living through extraordinary times. All adapted to changes they did not choose. All lost people to historical forces. All survived somehow, and all passed something forward. Memories, lessons to the next generation. The youngest generations of Chinese have no personal memory of the struggles that define their grandparents' lives. They grew up with smartphones and high-speed rail and assumptions about Chinese power. The century of humiliation is history class, not lived experience. Their China is confident, technologically advanced, economically powerful. This creates both opportunity and responsibility. Opportunity because they can build futures without being paralyzed by trauma. Responsibility because the recovery their grandparents achieved must be preserved and extended. The young tech entrepreneur coding in this startup office stands on foundations built by generations who suffered enormously. The peaceful, prosperous conditions enabling innovation were purchased with millions of lives. Does this generation understand what was sacrificed to create their opportunities? Some do deeply. Others take prosperity for granted as the natural state of things. This is perhaps the ultimate sign of successful recovery. When younger generations no longer feel defined by historical trauma, when the wounds have healed enough that descendants can live forward rather than backward, yet complete forgetting would dishonor those who suffered. The balance is difficult. Remember enough to learn and honor sacrifice, but not so much that memory paralyzes the present. China still struggles with this balance, oscillating between nationalistic obsession with past humiliation and future-oriented confidence. The paintings endure. The aesthetic principles that created these landscapes survived the Opium Wars, the revolutions, the upheavals. Artists continued painting mountains and mist through every crisis. The tradition was challenged, suppressed, attacked, but never completely destroyed. And in the end, it persists. This is perhaps the deepest answer to our question about how opium destroyed China's greatest empire. It destroyed the political structure. The Qing Dynasty fell. It destroyed the economic system. The silver-based economy collapsed. It destroyed the self-perception. The Middle Kingdom's cosmic centrality shattered. It destroyed millions of individual lives. Addiction, war, famine, violence. But it did not destroy the civilization's ability to create beauty. The paintings, the gardens, the poetry, the philosophy, these continued somehow. Bent, damaged, interrupted, but not erased. Culture proved more resilient than political systems. Aesthetic traditions proved more durable than governments. The human drive to create meaning and beauty persisted even through catastrophe. The temple courtyard grows quiet as evening settles. The day's visitors have departed. The monks have completed evening prayers. The space returns to its essential stillness, the same stillness it held when the Qing Dynasty ruled, when opium ships arrived at Canton, when wars raged, when revolutions convulsed society, when famines struck, when reforms transformed everything. This place witnessed all of it from its particular location, yet remained fundamentally itself. The stones that pave the courtyard were set long before the Opium Wars. The tree that shades the meditation hall has grown through decades of upheaval. The pond reflects the same sky that illuminated both suffering and recovery. There is wisdom in this stillness, not denial of suffering or minimizing of trauma, but recognition that beneath the turbulent surface of historical events, something continues. Life persists, beauty endures, the capacity for peace remains. Even after the worst horrors, the world keeps turning, seasons keep changing, and moments of genuine quiet can still be found. The story we have traced is one of immense suffering, catastrophic loss, generations of trauma, but it is also one of remarkable survival, eventual recovery, resilient adaptation, The Qing Dynasty fell, but China endured. Millions died, but hundreds of millions continued. The century of humiliation ended, and new eras began. History's lessons are multiple and complex. Opium showed how commercial greed combined with imperial power can devastate societies. The wars demonstrated the costs of technological stagnation and resistance to change. The revolutions revealed how trauma drives desperate solutions that sometimes create new disasters. The recovery proved that even catastrophic setbacks need not be permanent. For those listening tonight, perhaps drifting towards sleep, the story offers strange comfort. Even the worst historical catastrophes eventually end. Even the deepest wounds eventually heal. Though scars remain, even civilizations that seem to be collapsing can find paths forward. The night always eventually gives way to dawn, though the darkness may last longer than anyone wishes. The temple lanterns glow softly in the gathering dusk. The evening breeze moves through the maple branches. The pond reflects the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. And in this moment, history becomes something gentler than trauma or triumph, simply the long story of humanity trying, failing, suffering, persisting, and occasionally finding moments of genuine peace. The river flows as it always has. It flowed when the Qing Dynasty was at its height. It flowed when opium ships arrived. It flowed past battles and revolutions. It flowed through famine and recovery. It will flow long after everyone currently alive has joined the ancestors in memory. This perspective, the river's perspective, geological time, cosmic scale, diminishes nothing that humans suffered, but places it in larger context. The universe is vast and old and indifferent. Human political systems are temporary arrangements that rise and fall. Even civilizations are not permanent. But while we are here, while we experience our brief moments of consciousness, our suffering is real and our efforts matter. The Opium Wars mattered to the millions who lived through them. The century of humiliation shaped the nation that emerged. The recovery made possible the lives of hundreds of millions living in peace and prosperity today. All of it was real and consequential within the human time frame that is our only frame of reference. And now, night settles. The river flows. The stars wheel slowly overhead. The ancient city sleeps. And perhaps it is time for this story to rest as well. We have traced a long journey from the height of Qing power, through opium's arrival, through wars and defeats, through humiliation and collapse, through revolutions and disasters, through eventual recovery and transformation. The empire that Commissioner Lin tried to save from poison fell, but the civilization endured, transformed, and found new forms. Was it worth the cost? That is not for historians to judge, but for those who lived through it and those who inherited both the trauma and the recovery. All we can do is witness, remember, and learn what lessons are possible from such immense suffering and eventual survival. The night deepens. The river continues its eternal flow. The story sleeps now, as perhaps should we all. The past cannot be changed, only understood. The future remains unwritten. And in this present moment, there is only the gentle darkness, the flowing water, and the quiet knowledge that even the longest night eventually yields to dawn. Rest now. The empire has fallen and risen again in different forms. The century of humiliation has ended. The struggles are over, at least these particular struggles, in these particular forms. Other challenges will come, as they always do, but for tonight, the story has been told. The river flows, the stars shine, the night holds everything gently, and in the darkness, history becomes memory. Memory becomes lesson, and we find whatever peace is possible with knowledge of both suffering and survival. Sleep well, the story is complete. The night is deep, and tomorrow, as always, will bring whatever it brings. But tonight belongs to rest, to peace, to the quiet flowing of water under stars, and to the gentle knowledge that even empires pass but the river flows eternal. Good night.